experiencing this series since we started it in January, and we're on the 14th one today, is that some of these sessions are longer. They cover a lot of text, and you'll notice maybe I'm talking faster, or just you feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much information. That happens. Some of it's great narrative. I think it's got great suspense and great storylines and all that, so maybe that's not quite so long. Today is actually really, really short. And I looked at that and I kind of grappled with it, and I thought, yeah, this needs to be separated out. And as I've said before in this class so many times, we need to sit in this for a little bit. So you'll see that the text today is Isaiah 44, verses 6 to 28. That's all it is. And so I want to just grapple with something here today and leave you with it. Then you can run with it, and we'll be back next week for probably something a little more on the longer side. But today we're in the series. This is the 12th letter that I've divided up in the book of Isaiah. Our series called Return to Sender, subtitled A Prophetic Prophet Delivers a Messianic Message to a World Gone Postal with God's Stamp of Approval. And this one's called Junk Mail today. So I want to begin today and kind of set the tone and kind of get your wheels turning in that direction as to where we're headed. And again, we're in Isaiah chapter 44, verses 6 to 28. We'll get there in just a minute. But junk mail, it's like you might have all sorts of what is junk mail, and it comes in so many different, a variety of shapes and sizes and everything else. So I'm going to give you the Collins English Dictionary meaning of the phrase junk mail. Junk mail is advertisements and publicity materials that you receive through the post or by email, which you have not asked for and which you do not want. Hence the title of the 12th letter in our series, Return to Sender. So let me give you a little, I would just probably call this Brad Brown background. All right? I know that's dangerous, so here we go. The first piece of junk mail was delivered many thousands of years ago to a little tropical garden / nudist camp surrounded by 4 meandering rivers and shaded by 2 opposing trees that stood out over the lush landscape among all the other foliage that made up the verdant, forested habitat of this living and working zoo. The mail was delivered unsolicited, not by snail mail, but by overnight snake in the grass. It was a not-so-free introductory offer of promotional material from the Fruit of the Month Club with an enticing "did God really say" telemarketing scam of promising that there would be no postage due and that you could quit anytime and return all unwanted items without penalty. What should have gone straight into the curator husband and wife's spam mail instead sat enticingly right at the top of their inbox, instantly covering up more pressing but less tempting items like animal naming, helpmate cleaving, fruitfully multiplying, creature dominating, and cool of the day God walking. What with a juicy offer that they supposedly could not refuse, the 2 occupants took out a year's subscription right on the spot. They no sooner received their first shipment of apples when a large, bright man in a smart white suit rapped on the garden gate. While waving around a flaming sword like some infernal baton, he informed the newest members of the Fruit of the Month Club that they had been summarily evicted from their home. This was due to their low combined credit scores, revealing that they could not possibly afford the club dues. The garden they tended was not owned by them, and thereby they could not use it as collateral. And unless someone else could pony up with the exorbitant fees, they were to vacate the premises immediately. The snake in the grass who sold them this bill of goods was strangely absent during the eviction, something about a head wound. However, no matter how far east the occupants migrated, no matter how many times they wrote to the snake in the grass customer service department that they no longer were in the club and for the company to cancel their subscription, every month junk mail from the Fruit of the Month Club somehow found its way into their mailbox. The subscription never ran out. As a matter of fact, generations later on a fertile plain even further east, a junk mail upgrade from the Fruit of the Month was offered that included a special kit for building buildings. The entire population signed up, combining the bricks that arrived by mail, which were included in each of their received kits, in order to build a tall skyscraper. During the construction project, one worker would ask the other, "How high?" with the answer always given, "Did God really say?" until they all became tongue-tied from fear of heights. Once the language barrier was bridged, diversifying the mailing list, the circulation of junk mail became more and more widespread, complete with shrewd, specific advertising mysteriously and intrusively based upon a customer's personal buying habits and history. More and more upgrades of keepsakes and collectibles became available that were designed especially for each recipient and their interests with low monthly payments. One such item, promising that it would be treasured forever, became very popular with a particular group of wandering nomads. It was a cow kit, complete with snap-together bovine body parts, brushes, and metallic gold paint, along with a solid wooden display stand included at no extra charge. In it was a secret drawer for keeping jewelry, and a special altar call push button at the back that played a lowing, mooing sound. But the cow craze proved short-lived, as many of the new subscribers tragically went down in flames. This because the competition was stiff, especially from another company that had arisen and who did not advertise through junk mail at all. Rather, they resorted to a business plan of stone tablet obedience to get their message out, against which junk mail kept rebranding itself over the centuries, moving away from tried and true relics like trees and towers and trophies. These souvenirs and statuary were replaced by hobbies and habits that now capitalized on the actual prideful motivation behind the subscription attraction in the first place. So, the old Fruit of the Month Club snake in the grass gimmick of the past had been revamped and updated into a multi-million-dollar enterprise advertised as "Own Your Own Throne." Gone were the days of simple apples pleasing to the eye. This now offered personal control at a whole new level that not only got to the heart of the issue, but also made consumers question the validity and the staying power of each and every stone tablet of the competing company. In Isaiah chapter 44, the glory of God is seen in very stark contrast to the absurdity and the uselessness of idols. Junk mail nonsense that had things gone differently, the idols we are tempted to create and worship would have been used to cook our lunch. But instead, if we're not careful, they will cook our goose. And here's the entire recipe. If you haven't turned there, turn to Isaiah chapter 44. And I'm going to be beginning at verse 6. And I'm in the New Living Translation. Isaiah 44, verse 6. Just let this wash over you for just a minute, and then we're going to pick it apart. This is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord of heaven's armies. I am the first and the last. There is no other God. Who is like me? Let him step forward and prove to you his power. Let him do as I have done since ancient times, when I established a people and explained its future. Do not tremble. Do not be afraid. Did I not proclaim my purposes for you long ago? You are my witnesses. Is there any other God? No. There is no other rock, not one. How foolish are those who manufacture idols. These prized objects are really worthless. The people who worship idols don't know this, so they are all put to shame. Who but a fool would make his own God, an idol that cannot help him one bit? All who worship idols will be disgraced, along with all these craftsmen, mere humans, who claim that they can make a god. They may all stand together, but they will all stand in terror and shame. The blacksmith stands at his forge to make a sharp tool, pounding and shaping it with all his might. His work makes him hungry and weak. It makes him thirsty and faint. Well, then the wood carver measures a block of wood and draws a pattern on it. He works with his chisel and plane, and he carves it into a human figure. He gives it human beauty, and he puts it in a little shrine. He cuts down cedars, he selects the cypress and the oak, he plants the pine in the forest to be nourished by the rain, and then he uses part of the wood to make a fire. With it, he warms himself and bakes his bread. Then, yes, it's true, he takes the rest of it and makes himself a god to worship. He makes an idol and bows down in front of it. He burns part of the tree to roast his meat and to keep himself warm, and he says, the fire feels good. And then he takes what's left and he makes his god. a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping and praying to it. Rescue me, he says. You are my God. Such stupidity and ignorance. Their eyes are closed and they cannot see. Their minds are shut and they cannot think. The person who made the idol never stops to reflect, oh, why, it's just a block of wood. I burned half of it for heat and used it to bake my bread and roast my meat. How can the rest of it be a god? Should I bow down to worship a piece of wood? The poor deluded fool feeds on ashes. He trusts something that can't help him at all, yet he cannot bring himself to ask, is this idol that I'm holding in my hand a lie? Whenever we receive any junk mail of any sort that looks to be the slightest bit intriguing or essential, God reminds us of that court scene that we talked about in his courtroom during the trial of the 8th century, 701 BC, when the idol-making defendants who were hoarding mounds of Babylonian junk mail in their backpacks on their return trip back to Judah made little gods right then and there in front of the one true God and his court. Manufactured idols that would supposedly lead, guide, and direct the defendants through the trials and tribulations of life. Like the airmail that we talked about a couple weeks ago of Isaiah chapter 40, verses 18 to 20, Isaiah 44, verses 6 to 20, which we just read, gives yet another indictment that the pagan idols of Isaiah's day were not a direct representation made by some sophisticated worshiper of some traditional supernatural entity. No. The block of wood, the carved stone, or this mass of molten metal, as it were, was it. That was it. It was the whole package. There was nothing behind it to back it up. It was just wood, metal, or stone, a dead object in and of itself, and yet it still fostered the people worshiping it. Go figure. So let's pick this apart for a second. Look back at verse 6 of Isaiah 44. Verse 6. This is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, the Lord of heaven's armies. I am the first and the last. There is no other God. Who is like me? Let him step forward and prove to you his power. Let him do as I have done since ancient times, when I established a people and explained its future. Do not tremble. Do not be afraid. Did I not proclaim my purposes for you long ago? You are my witnesses. Is there any other God? No. There is no other rock. Not one. These three verses actually form a perfect, what scholars call a brachio inclusio, I believe that would be the Latin, with verse 20. And the brachio inclusio is actually a literary device that kind of acts like bookends scripturally. Biblical authors do it all the time, particularly in the Psalms, where they have different cadences and different layouts where they start and finish with the same sentence and all of that. This kind of does the same thing. And it really is asking this question. If verses 6 to 8 that we just read are true, and they are, that there is no other God, if that's true, and I presume you all agree with that, all right, because no one's walked out yet, all right? So if that's true, then any small g, any God with a small g that you just might pick up in your hands, whether you temporarily, maybe even innocently, just hold it out in the palm of your hand like a curiosity, or maybe over time, it becomes permanently clenched and now it's indispensable. Either or anything in between is a lie from the pit. Look at verse 9. Chapter 44. How foolish are those who manufacture idols. These prized objects are really worthless. The people who worship idols don't know this, so they're all put to shame. Who but a fool would make his own God? An idol that cannot help him one bit. All who worship idols will be disgraced, along with all these craftsmen, mere humans who claim that they can make a god. They may all stand together, but they will stand in terror and shame. This is not so idle of a warning of disgrace, terror, and shame for those fools who cunningly manufacture small g gods, and for that close-knit band of worshipers who prize the worthless things. And if you think for just 1 minute, well, that was then. That's back in 700 BC. That's not us now. We're far more sophisticated, and we're far more monotheistic than that. Hang on, folks. Just hang on. I don't think we're all out scot-free yet. Here's the warning. What you idolize always begins with an idle lie. You see that little cute play on words? Try it. What you idolize, all one word, always, always, always begins with idle lies. Turn over to Psalm 115, just a couple books back. Psalm 115, and I'm just going to start reading verse 1 here, just 8 verses of this psalm. Psalm 115. Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name goes all the glory, for your unfailing love and faithfulness. Why let the nations say, where is their God? Our God is in the heavens, and he does as he pleases. Their idols are merely things of silver and gold, shaped by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot hear. They have ears but cannot hear, or eyes but cannot see, ears that cannot hear, and noses but they cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, and feet but cannot walk, and throats but cannot make a sound. Get this, and those who make idols are just like them, as are all who trust in them. Behind this series of observations spelled out by the psalmist here in Psalm 115, especially verses 4 through 8, we find behind this, if you take time enough to just sit in it for a second, serious theological accusations against any God other than the one in heaven who does what he pleases. And here's what we mean by that. If you look at this list here, it's kind of interesting, it's poetic, it's a little sarcastic and snarky, to be sure, and rightly so. But think about this as it would play out, its ramifications in practical today's language. What is shaped by human hands has, first of all, no voice. If it has no voice, it has no capacity for revelation. First serious theological accusation. If it has no sight, and it doesn't, it has no moral observation of right or wrong. It can't. If it has no ears, it has no way of hearing prayers or even responding to them. If it has no sense of smell, it has no provision for an acceptable sacrifice for atonement. It wouldn't know what it was if it bit it in the backside. Theological problem, the next one. No hands mean no feelings of our infirmities and no touching care. The idols have no feet, so there's no movement or activity. And finally, there's no sound in their throat, which means they have no thoughts. And you might find yourself concocting and worshiping something like that literally is a nothing. As Isaiah has said, it is just either a block of wood, a big stone, or some metal molten image that you've concocted. It has nothing to back it up. With this in mind, how pathetic and ironic it is that the meaningless and dead idol to this day still has the grim power to make its devotees just like itself. Well, that's an insult. Just like, what do you mean? No hands, no feet, no sound, no voice, no sight, no ears, no sense. Do you want to be like that? Well, no, of course I don't want to be like that. Well, then hang on and be aware that that is exactly the accusation and the prediction that Isaiah is making. Back to Isaiah chapter 44, verse 12. The blacksmith stands at his forge to make a sharp tool, pounding and shaping it with all his might. His work makes him hungry and weak. It makes him thirsty and faint. Then the woodcarver measures a block of wood, he draws a pattern on it, and works with chisel and plane and carves it into a human figure. He gives it human beauty, and he puts it in a little shrine. Isaiah is now giving us a detail to what we might call an old-fashioned idol factory. Kind of like an old-fashioned candy factory. In spite of the cold, hard fact that is looming over all of these verses, that the result of human effort cannot ever rise above the human. Ever! And yet, here are these factories churning out these trinkets that people still want to buy. Look at verse 14. He, this woodcarver, cuts down cedars, he selects the cypress and the oak, he plants the pine in the forest to be nourished by the rain. And then he uses part of the wood to make a fire. With it, he warms himself and bakes his bread, and then, yes, it's true, he takes the rest of it and makes himself a god to worship. He makes an idol, and he bows down in front of it. He burns part of the tree to roast his meat and to keep himself warm, and he says, the fire feels good. And then he takes what's left, he makes his god a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping it and praying to it. Rescue me, he says, you are my God. Such stupidity and ignorance. Their eyes are closed and they cannot see. Their minds are shut and they cannot think. The person who made the idol never stops to reflect. It's just a block of pickin' wood. I burned half of it for heat. I used it to bake my bread and roast my meat. How can the rest of it be a god? Should I really, really bow down to worship a piece of wood? I love that. Think about this for just a minute. Half of this, what will be an idol, is going to become a fire, okay, food for a fire, which will in turn help you to bake your bread and cook your meat. And it becomes actually infused, and very confusingly so if we're not careful, into everyday life. That's what's being said here. It's like, it's all part of everyday life, and that's what gives these idols, at least in their nascent form, an enticing advertisement as junk mail to you and I. In other words, we would look at this and go, well, yeah, how could you be so stupid to worship the idol? Well, that's not the whole package. The idol's coming from aspects of and needs of everyday life and conveniences. Our idols come from the stuff of everyday life, even in 2019. They start by keeping us warm and fed, which would mean a comfort, an escape, a distraction. And then over time, we give them more and more credit than is their due. It happens. We're prone to wander, elevating them to the status of the one who provided the heat and the food in the first place. And quite possibly, if you give it long enough, that will usurp him before you even know it. So to actually drive this home, here are some present-day idol examples that are constantly at risk at being elevated by you and I, with the best of intentions, with the most godly of lifestyles, devotions daily, praying daily. This stuff can get in through the nooks and crannies. So I want to offer you this list. They are not initially harmful. Some of them are not initially harmful in and of themselves, so make that clear. While others are problematic to the core, make that equally as clear. These may represent everything from a habit for years to just a moment of weakness. It could be either one. But all when you give yourself permission to let go of one thing for another. The list is far from exhaustive, I admit that. And they are in no particular order. It is deliberately read in what I would call real-life rapid fire, in order to illustrate the abundance of instantaneous diversions from which we can choose in voting for our very own American idols. Here we go. Idol examples: humility, pride, authors, celebrities, church, car, home, property, spouse, children, friends, pets, personal freedom, privacy, control, Facebook, food, drink, drugs, entertainment, sex, patriotism, nutrition, notoriety, career, cults, cleaning, promotions, athletics, Fox News, ministry, good looks, music, clothes, self, cell phone, school, politics, talent, books, money, stability, gambling, security, safety, Twitter, emails, new age, talents, health, gifts, art, travel, the Bible, routine, schedule, the past, comfort, land, Amazon, national freedom, leisure, the present, order, coffee, publicity, porn, games, Instagram, cooking, Netflix, exercise, Broncos, service, shopping, hobbies, Marvel Universe, attention, having the last word, pity, education, the future, prestige, gossip, slander, missions, Legos, friends, status, ease, guns, order, dessert, religion, revenge. This from Charles Spurgeon. The soul must be delivered from delighting in the groveling toys of earth. We are truly surrounded by the convenient heat and food of potential idols. There is no escaping them. But there is a big difference, folks, between living among them and bowing an unnecessary amount of time and energy towards them. In other words, to be in the world of idols, but not of the world of idols. Here are two inadequacies that are seen most clearly in the idolatry, the physical objects of worship which Isaiah speaks of. Here they are. Whatever captures the heart and the mind, the human heart and the mind, as an alternative to Jesus and his way of truth. Simply put, idols today would be whatever captures the mind, the human mind and the heart, as an alternative to Jesus and the way of faith. Back to Isaiah 44, verse 21. Isaiah 44, 21. Pay attention, O Jacob, for you are my servant, O Israel. I, the Lord, made you, and I will not forget you. I have swept away your sins like a cloud. I have scattered your offenses like the morning mist. Oh, return to me, for I have paid the price to set you free. Sing, O heavens, for the Lord has done this wondrous thing. Shout for joy, O depths of the earth. Break into song, O mountains and forests and every tree. For the Lord has redeemed Jacob and is glorified in Israel. These verses are a reminder that we, the redeemed, are in fact sweepstakes winners. If you were here for us the last time we're in the series of Isaiah. Continue, verse 24. This is what the Lord says, your Redeemer and Creator. I am the Lord who made all things. I alone stretched out the heavens. Who was with me when I made the earth? I exposed the false prophets as liars and made fools of fortune tellers. I caused the wise to give bad advice, thus proving them to be fools. Here's a reminder in these verses that false prophets, fortune tellers, and fools are not, in fact, sweepstakes winners. You see the difference here. Charles Spurgeon again. How irrational that men should adore that which is less than themselves. How strange that a man should think that he can make a god. Can madness go further? Our God is a spirit, and his hands made the heavens and the earth. Well may we worship him, and we need not be disturbed at the sneering question of those who are so insane as to refuse to adore the living God, and yet bow their knees before images of their own carving. We may make an application of all this to the times in which we are now living. The God of modern thought is the creation of the thinker himself, evolved out of his own consciousness, or fashioned according to his own notion of what a God should be. Now it is evident that such a being is no God. It is impossible that there should be a God at all, except the God of Revelation. And here's the God of Revelation doing just that and explaining the future. Look at verse 7, Isaiah 44. Look at verse 26. But I carry out the predictions of my prophets. By them I say to Jerusalem, people will live here again. And to the towns of Judah, you will be rebuilt. I will restore all your ruins. When I speak to the rivers and say, dry up, they will be dry. When I say of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he will certainly do as I say. He will command, rebuild Jerusalem, and he will say, restore the temple. Look at this line in verse 26. Just stew on this for just a second. I carry out the predictions of my prophets. Bank on it. I carry out the predictions of my prophets. I will. There's nothing you can do or all mankind can do to stop Almighty God, and oftentimes his glacial purposes from working themselves out, but he will carry out the predictions of his prophets. I think I would just challenge you, why don't you read the Old Testament from cover to cover and recite that in your head every time you're reading the Old Testament. He will. And in many cases, he's already done it. And in many cases, he hasn't yet. But here it is, folks. 2 words, just take them to the bank. He will. Isaiah, who is very much at home with his special dimension of prediction, and who, like no other prophet, makes these predictions and their fulfillment. He makes them the keystone of his proof. His proof infallible that the Lord is the only God. he first calls Cyrus by name right here, chapter 44, verse 28, 100 years before he was ever born. So you've got one right here in front of your face. He will carry out the predictions of his prophets. Since his birth in 590 BC, little Cyrus was an empire builder right from the start. He did not know the Lord, but the Lord knew him. His mother was the daughter of the king of Media, and his father was the king of Persia. Their marriage was a strategic alliance between the two countries. 10 years before he took over the Persian throne from his father, he conquered his mother's homeland, making the Medes and the Persians into one mighty kingdom. And no sooner had he fused his mom and dad's ancestral turf under one roof than he started conquering territory after territory after territory, expanding his kingdom into a growing, threatening empire with which to be reckoned for the next 200 years. 20 years into his reign, on October 29th, 539 BC, Cyrus brought reigning Babylon to its knees, after which he wasted no time in releasing the captive Jews, giving them a green light to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Isaiah describes these events in living color 150 years before the return of the exiles ever happened. I will carry out the predictions of my prophets. And all this brings us right back to the present, and I know you're waiting for it, God's rock, paper, scissors, which today we will complete. And for the remainder of this series, we will hammer home so that you can retain it. These are the three historical shifts or periods which are titanic and colossal at times that actually encapsulate the whole book of Isaiah. He didn't live through all these times, but they encapsulate the entire book and its predictions. So here we go. For all of you familiar with rock, paper, scissors, way to go. Okay, fist out, hand out. Line number 1. If you don't remember it, here we go. Assyria crushes northern Israel. Try it again. Assyria crushes northern Israel. Keep your hand and pivot it up now. Babylon smothers Assyria and southern Judah. Babylon smothers Assyria and southern Judah. Ready for this? Here we go. Cyrus cuts up Babylon and cuts loose Israel. That's it. The 3 periods of the book of Isaiah, all 66 chapters. We're going to do it one more time. We're going to do it all together, folks. This is a stretch for you. You probably did not even sign up for this when you walked through this door. But here you go, all right? Assyria crushes northern Israel. Babylon smothers Assyria and southern Judah. Cyrus cuts up Babylon and releases Israel. You're almost there. You're not going to maybe do this one more time. Oh, yes, I am. It's on film. Are you ready? Assyria crushes northern Israel. Okay? Babylon smothers Assyria and southern Judah. Cyrus cuts up Babylon and cuts loose Israel. Way to go. Isaiah chapter 44, verse 20. I skipped it deliberately as we conclude here. The poor deluded fool feeds on ashes. He trusts something that can't help him at all. Yet he cannot bring himself to ask, is this idol that I'm holding in my hand a lie? I want you to just entertain this thought for just a minute. Have the courage and the honest introspection today to bring yourself to ask this question. And you may or may not, according to this verse, actually be chewing on day-old charcoal briquettes while you do it. Is this idol that I'm holding in my hand a lie? And I'm presuming that there might be one. I'm not asking you to ask the question, do I have an idol in my hand? You do. You do. Now, it might be out here, or it might be here already, but you have one. Maybe many. So, ask the question, we'll make the assumption. Is this idol I'm holding in my hand a lie? The idolater picks up the figurine in his hand, holding it, but in reality, it holds him. He or she is in bondage to a lie. All around us, at our fingertips, folks, and you know this because you live in it, are umpteen violations of the first and second commandments. They are bombarding us every second in this technological age. They're only to be avoided when our hands are already occupied with holding the hand of someone else. and holding it tightly, I might add. Turn back over to the Psalms. Psalm 24, we'll end here. Psalm 24, very interesting turn of phrase by David. Psalm 24, verse 1, just the 5 verses. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him. For he laid the earth's foundation on the seas, and built it on the ocean depths. Who may climb the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? Only those whose hands and hearts are pure, who do not worship idols and never tell lies. They will receive the Lord's blessing and have a right relationship with God, their Savior. Look at verse 4 again. Only those whose hands and hearts are pure. I think this is fascinating. Once again, like we talked about in Isaiah 40:31, lots of variety for even David here in the Hebrew language to use different words and terms. And the word he used here for hands, actually in the Hebrew, is pictured here as a grip. It's not a hand held out. It's a grip, describing what the hand takes hold of and what it retains for either good or ill. Okay? That person is the one who actually can stand in this holy place, the one whose hands and heart are pure. That means what it's gripping is none other than Almighty God and nothing else. And he's gripping it ever so tightly. That's the word picture of the word hands here. There's a Roman poet, maybe a satirist is what you might call him. His name is Quintus Horatius Flaccus, better known simply as Horace. Yeah, you think? Yeah. The guy was in elementary school, tried to say that name all the whole year. No, Horace, just call me Horace. He lived in and around Greece and Italy between 65 and 8 BC. He said this in one of his satirical quips. Once I used to be an oak tree. A craftsman, however, preferred that I should be a god. A comment with implications to which the Apostle Paul would in fact concur when he wrote to the church in Corinth, who we would characterize as really being hooked on idols. He said this, 1 Corinthians 8:4. We all know that an idol is not really a god, and that there is only one God. Do we? I'll say it again. I'm not going to make the assumption here, and don't listen to it with the same assumption. We all know that an idol is not really a god, and that there is only one God. That same Roman poet, Horace, was also famous for saying, Carpe diem, seize the day. I would ask yourself this question. Be careful of what you seize today. And that lie that might right now be clenched in your fist as a result of what you have seized. So once again, here's the question. What's in your hand? What are you gripping so tightly right now that's now gripping you? Because as we said, idols come in very myriad forms, shapes and sizes, all different kinds. And depending on how you're wired and how your weaknesses are wired, different for everybody. Different for everybody. What I look at and just doesn't even, it's not even on my radar, somebody could be completely obsessed with. And what I cannot get enough of, in a bad way, you might not even be remotely attracted to. So this is an individual process that we must look at. Remember that in every case but one, that is scriptural, from Genesis to Revelation, in every case but one, what you hold in your right hand is a lie. In every case but one. The only object your right hand should be holding at all times is the hand of Almighty God. Isaiah 62:3. But this in turn will foster the same accusation being thrown right back at us from those around us, still holding graven images of all kinds in their own hands. They will point at you and I, and they will say, what you are now holding, the hand of God, in your right hand is a lie. This is the other side of no idol worship. There is persecution attached to it that no one talks about. You start holding singularly the hand of Almighty God in a clenched fist from Psalm 24 and never let go, you will evoke persecution from those who are still clenching some other idol. and they will turn around and throw these words right back at you. What you are now holding in your right hand is a lie, and you and I both know that that is patently untrue. We would say, really? That kind of accusation sounds more like left-handed, wrong-headed junk mail to me. But this is the day in which you and I live. We are like two lines of protesters with idol-worshiping wide road yelling at those worshiping the one true God on the narrow one, Matthew 7:13-14. We must be very careful from here on out, if we haven't already, not to take the bait and cross over the line. Because for you to cross over the line, guess what you have to do with your handhold? I'm going to cross over. I'll be back in just a minute, God. Really? Or even cross the street in River City, Iowa from 1912 in order to check out the new pool table in the Please All billiard parlor, to which newly arrived music man Harold Hill cautions the swelling crowd to avoid trouble because the idle mind is the devil's playground. If we're not careful, the vacuum left by an idle mind, I-D-L-E, is quickly, in our case, instantaneously almost, filled with an idle one, I-D-O-L. Either singular or legioned, if you let it happen. Either way, the mind then becomes a silk purse made out of a sow's ear. That's right out of Mark chapter 5, verses 9-13. And none of this was news to the Apostle Paul, who countered this type of bondage 1,970 years before Professor Hill. He says this: fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Think. That starts with T, and that rhymes with G, and that stands for God. Do you? Well, things came to a head many years later when one of the three board of directors in the competing Stone Tablet Company was murdered by the president of the Own Your Own Throne Junk Mail and Telemarketing Corporation. The event sent shockwaves through the business community until the Stone Tablet Company reemerged as the 3-in-1 dynasty, causing public stock in the Own Your Own Throne Corporation to plummet. Add to this, the 3-in-1 dynasty was going to counter Own Your Own Throne's junk mail advertising with a whole new way to let the buyer beware. Namely, seeking out every individual with God really did say conviction. As a result, 3-in-1 sales skyrocketed, especially when it was discovered that the third murdered board member was actually still conducting business right along with his other two partners, alive and well. Something about a bruised heel. Our postscript today from Isaiah's 12th letter to us is from Isaiah chapter 43, verse 13, which lets the left hand know exactly what the right hand should be doing. From eternity to eternity, I am God. No one can snatch anyone out of my hand. No one can undo what I have done. And that is no idle threat. Next week, if you are reading along, read chapters 45 to 48, which I would say are excerpts from that big, thick, glossy, colorful, soft-covered book stuffed in your mailbox for which you have been anxiously awaiting for weeks, and it's better known as the Sears catalog. Let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for these truths that may be hard and jarring at times, but they meet us right where we live, right where we act, right where we're tempted, right where we just want a moment to ourselves. We just want a little peace and quiet. We just want to do something for us for a change. This is all a formula for disaster if we're not careful. I just pray that you would help us to, if we have unclenched our hand from yours because we wanted to just cross over and see what the other side was doing for even just a minute, whether that's electronically, conversationally, our job, a relationship, help us to reclench your hand. Take our right hand and raise it up and grab yours like never before and never let go. I pray that in this case, that the left hand would get the message that the right hand is never going to release its grip from you, no matter what challenges we face, no matter what trials and tribulations come our way. We are never going to even subconsciously think that that little trinket, that little hobby, that little habit, that little pastime, that little form of entertainment will somehow be just the panacea we need just to get through a moment or a day or a week. And in order to do so, we've got to loosen our grip from you. I pray that this passage today, as short as it is, would be a powerful, profound reminder that we can never take the risk of losing the grip from you. You're going to do whatever you want to do, and if we want to be a part of that plan and process, we can never let go. And I pray that we would just be reassured today of that fact, and be reassured of the invincibility of who we are, weak as we are, when we attach ourselves to your strength. Thank you again for this reminder today. Thank you so much for Isaiah and the risks he took personally in putting all this down. Again, we just pray that you would just walk with us through this counterculture that we live, and we will, in fact, be bombarded with, right when we leave here, for other supposed idols claiming and clamoring for our attention. I pray that you would help us to deflect them, help us to stay focused, help us most emphatically to fix our eyes on Jesus, who categorically is the author and perfecter of our faith. Make it so this week, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. See you next week.